Hi everybody, I'm Daryl and I'm just continuing looking at interesting government reports, well ones that are interesting to me. I like to make some dry videos where I dig through some reports and try and work out what's going on. Why is the government getting these reports written, and you know what is it for? And so the latest one I've been looking at is this one here. It's an EECA, so it's the Energy Efficiency Conservation Authority. They paid KPMG money to do this report, and um, there were just a few little funny things in the report that I thought were worthwhile pointing out. What kind of disappoints me about the government is they make reports and things, and they seem to have they do a lot of effort, and a lot of it's really good, but there always seems to be just some little kind of technical things that I think are kind of questionable. So um, I just question a couple of things in this report, and I'll tell you about them when we get in. But I'll just roll down. I'll put a link to the report so that you can download it. Look, it's possibly available on kpmg.com/nz. There's a really nice giant infographic here. Let's see if I can move this around in such a way that you can look at it a bit better. This screen is kind of a little weird because it's super giant. So there are about 14,000 electric cars in New Zealand at the time this report, or when they got the data for this report, and it says that EV registration 6,000 in the last 12 months. So effectively, we've got a doubling of electric cars roughly over every year for the last few years, maybe about 5 years, roughly doubling, which is that's a extremely strong exponential function. And just a curious thing about extremely strong exponential functions with doubling, it means that just a mathematical thing. It means that if it's doubling every year, that means half of the things came in the last year. And if you go back 2 years, 3/4 of the things came in the last 2 years. And if you go back 3 years, let's see if I can do the maths, it means that is it 7/8 of the things arrived in the last 3 years. So massively the number of electric cars has been increasing. But what's really super is that public car charging and stuff's been increasing a lot too. So that's just some data on cars. Yeah, and because this report is about charging, it's saying that most cars support regular 3.7 kilowatt maximum trickle charging. So they're calling that trickle charging. And the phrase for trickle charging could be 1 kilowatt in other countries. I know that in the United States, some trickle chargers are only 900 watts or around that level. But in New Zealand, our power supply is such that it's easy to install a 3.5 kilowatt charger at home. But typically, people use ones that are about 1.6 or 1.8 kilowatts. So that's just an interesting point. And then a small number of cars can do between 3.8 and 7 kilowatts. So those are typically, I'm going to say, Ionics and a few Leafs. There might be some Mercedes and BMW cars. And then in these higher range ones, there's a few kind of European cars that can do 11 kilowatts on 3-phase or 22 kilowatts on 3-phase. Quite often 7 kilowatts or less is single phase, and 11 or 22 kilowatts can be 3 phases. And just another exception to the exception, I believe that Tesla cars have 20 kilowatt chargers typically built in, and so most people who buy a Tesla car in New Zealand can get a higher capacity charger installed at home, and I think the price of the car includes that higher capacity charger. So they give you 2 charge cables, one for plugging into a wall that you might use when you're visiting somewhere, and the other one for permanent installation at home. And then there's just a thing on pricing of charging cables, trickle charging, $500 to $1,000, and then higher rate charges at higher prices. Um, and then what's the something is how many cars that can charge below and above 3.7 kilowatts, and what the projection for 2023, so that's 4 years in the future. And then so what they're saying is that predominantly older cars will have these lower value charging, 3.7 kilowatts, and then higher value charging becomes more common after a while. So at the moment, a lot of new cars have the above 7 kilowatt charging, or 7 kilowatts or above. Hopefully that was all on screen. I'm going to just rejiggle my windows. What happened there? Put that back there. I think that's the whole width of that screen. Probably just make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so yeah, I think that's how my display works out. Good. I've got a 2 display set up, and that means that this white panel is on one screen and this other panel is actually on a different display, so my program that's recording the video is on another display. So just an introduction. I don't know, maybe I'll read a little bit of this. Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority is charged with promoting energy efficiency, energy conservation and renewable energy. EECA commissioned the study of residential EV charging technology as a first step of understanding the wider EV charging landscape. Its purpose is to contribute knowledge, evidence and information and conservation to the conversation well, I didn't read that. To the conversation about potential impact of home charging on electrical systems, including renewable energy component. This is consistent with EECA's mission to mobilise New Zealanders to be the world leaders in clean and clever energy use. What's good about New Zealand, we're a small country and we like advanced tech and we love to buy new stuff. So like New Zealanders are often early adopters. I think like one of the classic cases of early adopter technology was SMS text messaging. I think New Zealand had that before just about anywhere else in the world. I remember kind of like in 1996, quite a lot of my friends were starting to use text messaging, and then I think some of my friends went to the United States about 10 years later, and nobody really had text messaging, and it was quite funny that's just the way. We got a technology rollout for cellular networks. We're one of the early countries to have a right across the country GSM network, and so we're able to be leading edge on that kind of stuff. And home internet had quite high early adoption compared with a lot of countries. And broadband, we have, like most people in New Zealand, have fibre to the home is available for a huge percentage. Think about 70% or 80% of houses probably have fibre to the home available now, and I think 40% of homes might be on fibre to the home. So getting gigabit internet speeds on just a regular home plan is very easy to get in New Zealand. Even if you live in a little village down to 5,000 people, I've seen little beach communities with 300 houses have fibre to the home. So whether you're in a big city or even rural villages or places quite out of big cities, fibre to the home is just ordinary option. So yeah, we are early adopters, and with that we're early adopters for electric cars compared with a lot of countries as well. We're way ahead of Australia, and Australia has really similar demographics in a lot of ways to New Zealand, but even a little bit richer. Yeah, so this point of this document was to gather some information, but I always query about biases and these kinds of things. So what is it saying? EECA considers further investigations relevant to EV charging should include the value of smart charging in New Zealand, impacts on low voltage electrical network, that means that just the power outlets that come to houses, household and consumer perspectives, future charging infrastructure requirements, addressing barriers and challenges, standards, regulations, and market design options. There's the thing, the low emissions vehicle contestable fund. This is quite a good thing in New Zealand. It's funding a lot of electric vehicle projects, light and heavy vehicles. But also the contestable fund, I can't remember how many rounds they're up to, seven or eight rounds of funding, and they have, I don't know, two or three rounds per year, and people can go, oh, I've got a business project, I've got a business group, we run a bunch of motels, we want to have some charges at all of our motels, we've got 10 motels in the group, and we want to install a couple of overnight charges at each motel so that our customers who drive electric cars can be well served, and the contestable fund will be like, oh, that makes sense because business travellers, it'll be convenient for them to charge overnight. It will improve business. It will improve knowledge that electric car charging is available, and that electric car charging is an everyday thing for tourism and business travellers. So they'll fund a third or a half of the value of that project, and everybody gets something. But the projects often contribute to knowledge so that everybody knows that the new technology is available. So that's quite good. Paper was prepared by KPMG based on secondary research using public information, EV charging technologies globally, and the size, composition, and charging requirements in New Zealand, EV fleet, and current availability of chargers in New Zealand. Also primary research using a survey. So they did a survey, which is good, and follow-up interviews with EV chargers and makers and EV manufacturers and distributors about available products and key market trends and projections of the size of composition of charging requirements of the New Zealand EV fleet. Now, just an interesting thing. When you do a survey, sometimes you ask people questions that they don't really actually know the answers to, or they roughly know the idea but don't know the technical details. And I think that there's a few things in this thing that I found a little bit odd, and that maybe it's based on some kind of like moderate misunderstandings there. So I'll come back to that later. EECA and KPMG thank the organisations that took part in the surveys. Okay, well that's nice. Good. I mean, it's good. I like EECA, I'd consider working at EECA because they do things that I'm interested in. So executive summary. So beautiful executive summaries where they can try and summarize whatever it is, a 40-page report in a couple of pages. Decarbonising transport is critical to addressing New Zealand's climate change challenge. Okay, so we've got a bit there saying how if we had a lot of cars and they used electricity, this would be really good. In New Zealand, we have a lot of renewable power. Currently, about 80% of all our electricity is renewable. And if you consider off-peak power, almost 100% of off-peak power is renewable, because we have 3 really great sources for renewable energy in New Zealand, or renewable electricity. We've got quite a big lot of hydro dams. There's hydro dams in the North and South Island, and maybe they account for something like between a half and 2/3 of our power requirement. And we've got wind power, which is New Zealand's, located at 40th degree latitude. So we get a lot of westerly wind coming across New Zealand, and there's lots of hills and places where siting windmills away from populated areas where they capture good amounts of wind means that we could perhaps get, I think we're I forget the exact number. I think we're somewhere between 8 and 15% of renewable power. I know that there's a couple of big wind farms. There's one about 50 kilometers north and about 50 kilometers south of where I live, and those are huge amounts of power, enough to run all the towns and cities basically near where I live. Just roughly. Or maybe all the houses in the towns and cities. It's quite a huge amount of generation there in wind power, and there's more wind power farms around the country. And then geothermal is the amazing one. Geothermal is one of the best kinds of renewable power there is, because it runs all the time and it's good base load. So I think the geothermal power plant runs at about 80% of its capacity all the time, and so this is the kind of thing where other countries might use a nuclear power plant. In New Zealand, we just use geothermal. And what's great about geothermal in New Zealand is there's lots of volcanic areas under the ground. So I heard that we've got consented designs up to about 22% and potential of up to about 30 or maybe 35% of New Zealand electricity could potentially come from geothermal. And geothermal's good because it's quite distributed, so there's a few places around the country where you can have it's very stable. It generates 24/7. It's not really connected to weather much, so it's a good system. So one of the major things in this report is that they talk about what happens when everybody charges their cars all at once. So maybe if I just read a bit of it, that might help. The global EV fleet is estimated at 5.4 million vehicles in 2018. Uptake has been growing due to the increasing choice and operating range of vehicles, government subsidies, and environmental awareness of consumers. Nevertheless, EVs still only account for 2% of sales in the automotive markets. Battery capacities have been increasing to provide greater operating range. With increasing battery size, EV makers also have introduced faster charging facilities. In New Zealand, the New Zealand EV fleet has been doubled annually in the last 3 years and currently stands at 14,000 vehicles. I think it's maybe 16 or 18,000 vehicles right now. This is driven partly because the availability of relatively low-cost vehicles, mainly from Japan. So one thing that New Zealand has that a lot of other countries don't have, we drive on the same side of the road as Japan, and we have a law that says used vehicles from Japan are allowed to be imported to New Zealand. And any vehicle standard basically that's okay in Japan is okay in New Zealand. So if a car was certified to be driven by normal people on normal roads in Japan, then that car is allowed to be used in New Zealand too. And that's a thing. And we have these big compliance centres. So slightly more than half of all the cars that come to New Zealand come as used cars from Japan. We have big compliance centres where ships turn up, unload the ships. The cars are thoroughly looked through, and things that are commonly faults on the cars, like if there's a car that's known for having a common faulty part, like bad brakes or something like that, then those things are fixed at the compliance centres, and then they come into car yards in New Zealand, and you just go to a car yard and you kind of just, if you see a car that fits your budget and you like it, you just buy it, and it's very easy. And a lot of people buy cars. It's very common to buy cars around $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 really cheap. So that's like 10,000 New Zealand dollars is about the same as 6,000 American dollars. So you can buy a cheap car. It might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and then you can drive it for a few years, and then buy another one. And that's more than half of people in New Zealand don't ever buy used cars in that way, or buy them used after they've been used by somebody else in New Zealand for a while. But electric cars are amazing because they particularly the Japanese ones, depreciate rather quickly, and so you can buy them at about half price 1 or 2 years later from when they're built. I bought a 30 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf when it was about 6 or 9 months old for about half the Japanese price. And so I got a car that was basically brand new. It had driven 6,000 Ks, and I've driven it like about a further 50,000 Ks, and yeah, that's amazing. So it's super good value. Where do I get to? The Interim Climate Change Committee has recently recommended a target for reducing annual transport emissions by at least 6 megatons of CO2 equivalent in the year 2035. In fact, we just passed some new laws the other day because there was one of those big climate change marches, and what was it, about 1% of New Zealand population turned up at Parliament to convince politicians that they need to sort that stuff out fast. Increasing the uptake of light electric vehicles has implications for the electrical system. I kind of agree with this. Current situation, more than 85% of current New Zealand EV fleet consists of battery electric vehicle models, Nissan Leaf, Nissan ENV 2000 vans, BMW i3s, Hyundai Ioniqs, and some Teslas, Model S, X, and suddenly, probably since this report was written, a lot of Model 3s. And PHEVs, we've got the Mitsubishi Outlander, which is a four-wheel drive, dual motor four-wheel drive, which is pretty cool, and Toyota Prius. And it says 77% of these vehicles support charging rates that are up to 3.7 kilowatts AC when you charge at home. Used Nissan Leafs from Japan have the 3.6 kilowatt internal charger, blah blah blah, too much details there. And so they say we can use a mode 2 charging cable. Charging rate of up to 3.7 kilowatts rate can be achieved by using a mode 2 charging cable, which is typically supplied with vehicles at purchase. Now, this is one of the first things that is wrong in this. The 3.7 kilowatt charge cables are not typically, so I worked at a used car dealership that sold electric cars, like all just electric cars, and maybe a couple of hybrids, but predominantly Nissan Leafs. And that's not true. That's not what we sold. What we actually sold is about 1.8 kilowatt chargers, which plug into a regular wall outlet. The Japanese charge cables, the voltages in New Zealand and Japan are different, and so good car dealers, which is most car dealers, don't sell the Japanese charge cables with the cars in New Zealand because they're totally inappropriate for use here, according to the rules. There's some laws about what a charge cable can be and whatever. So that, I think that's wrong. So that's something in the executive summary that's not really right. So in fact, the cars actually only charge at half the speed, and a lot of this document is about, well, what about power draws in neighborhoods when everybody charges their cars and when they get home from work all at the same time. So that's sort of important. Near-term outlook. Price parity with traditional vehicles is considered a key driver for EV adoption. With near price parity, it's assumed that EVs can reach significant share of new sales, 30 or 50%, as in Norway. So this is New Zealand. So New Zealand people they like good value stuff. So for a lot of people, if you could buy the equivalent petrol car or electric car, if the electric car is going to cost less to maintain and be cheaper to run, most people would buy the electric car because people are just price conscious. Because I worked in a car dealership where we sold a lot of used electric cars, I kind of have a rough idea of, there's a lot of people that are buying, people who are buying electric cars because it's the right thing to do, it's good for the environment. Yeah, there's a big group of people that do that, but it's far, far exceeded by the economically conscientious people that need to balance their budget. A lot of retired people like to buy electric cars because the running costs have been so low. There's actually a because currently, if this is going to change next year, maybe, currently New Zealand cars don't pay road taxes because the road taxes are included in petrol and paid separately in diesel, but not at all in electric cars. Electric cars are just in a little exception for the moment, but it's actually a legal exception. They ought to pay road user tax, road user charges, which is about $7 American per 100 miles, or $7 New Zealand per 100 kilometers. And they don't. They've got a legal exception, and so no one pays road user charges. So everybody who's got an electric car at the moment is winning massively from a tax variation. So they project, growing numbers of electric vehicles, which makes perfect sense, and they've got different scenarios on whether price parity occurs sooner or later, and that's kind of what these graphs are about. And when there's more cars, people are going to need more charging, and when there's more charging, it's going to consume more power in the neighborhoods, and when there's more power consumed in the neighborhoods, then people are the neighborhoods are gonna draw more than what the power network in the neighborhood's designed for. And the vast majority of the problem is because some cars can draw very high power, and that's what a lot of this document is about. Faster EV chargers draw a relatively large electrical load above 3.7 kilowatts to 22 kilowatts. These additional loads can exceed the design capacity of the distribution networks and the electrical network in the home during peak periods. Overseas studies highlight the impact of EV clustering in a few suburbs and time of use electricity rates, which encourage EV users to begin charging at the start of the lower price period. EV charging coinciding with peak demand would increase the need for peaking generation, which is more likely to be supplied from gas and coal-fired plants in New Zealand. So this is the case. So our coal plant ramps up for the dinner time peak, especially in winter, because people come home from work and turn on their heaters. Kids come home from school, watch TV, turn on the heaters, play on computers, turn on the heaters, and then people come home and make dinner, turn on the stove, and then you want to be cozy in the evening. You keep the heater on until whatever time you go to bed, often between 9 and 11 p.m., something like that. Then at 11 p.m. quite often off-peak electricity rates start. So a lot of people set the charge timers in their cars to start charging at 11 p.m. So then there's a sudden extra boost. And although there's not that many cars in New Zealand at the moment, it's not a problem at the moment, envisaging that it will be a problem. And the document will go on. Managed charging, so that they're all going, well, we need to have managed charging because of these peak problems. Now, there's something that I haven't seen in this document. I had a reasonably good read through it. They never talk about a few things. So I forgot this is my document. Maybe I'll get my notes out, and then we'll have a look at that. How I'm just going to open my note program. Let me do that. You can go Window tab, Pages. There we go. Great. Okay, so let's have a look. So I've got to page 10, and so in my first note for page 10 was this bit here. The main barriers to the adoption of smart chargers, including the high upfront cost and lack of industry-wide management charging system, would incentivize their take up. Now, The thing is that they all just go to smart managed. The thing is that New Zealand has an old but really useful management system for managing peak loads on an electrical network. We have ripple control power supply, which means that you have a special meter box or a special box in your meter box that has a separate circuit. And the separate circuit, it's around 25 or 40 amps. And this generally feeds hot water cylinders. Now, there was a time, and I'm not sure if this is still the case, but because not all of the houses in New Zealand arrived in the last 10 years, the vast majority of houses, as far as I can tell, have ripple controllers in their meter boards. And there was a time where the hot water cylinders, if you had a hot water cylinder over a certain amount, I don't remember what the number was, I'm gonna just guess 2 kilowatts. If you had a hot water cylinder, so electric hot water heater that heated, it had to be connected through the ripple controller, and what the ripple controller does is it allows the power company to turn off your hot water cylinder when it wants to. So what generally happens is that in winter, when there's too much demand on the electrical network, we'll say New Zealand's a winter peaking country because our summers aren't super hot, but a lot of people live, colder places and run electrical heating in the overnight, and so they made it so that the hot water cylinder can be turned off while people cook dinner, and I've monitored my ripple controller a tiny bit, and it doesn't often get turned off, but I know that when electrical power usage spikes, which makes the electrical market spot price extremely high, that's when it gets turned off for me. And it's different for every power company, and the power companies are divided all around the regions of New Zealand. So I suppose power companies are often covering regions of sort of 50 to 100 kilometer segments of the country, have different power retailers. And also there's the way our power network is structured, there's generators and then lines network companies and then power retailers. So you can actually get different power pricing plans by buying your power from different companies, even though it uses the same wires and same generators. It's all about how bundles of power are bought and sold on a power exchange, like a stock market exchange, and you can watch it. It's very fun. EM6 live.co.nz, or search for energy market EM6 on Google, and you can see the live power auctioning in New Zealand, and it's fun because you can see how the power is generated and which areas are buying and selling it, and you can see what the distribution costs are around the country. It's fun if you like that kind of stuff. Maybe I could just open a browser and show you. It's just EM6 live. Yeah, so just there we go. Google search for EM6 live, you get this thing, and so there you go. So these are the power prices for per megawatt hour. So like here it's 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is the spot price buying on the market that big power companies buy power at, and these fluctuate a lot. Like you can see as demand fluctuates through the day and the amount of generation fluctuates, you can see it change. And I think you can click on these different things. You can see how much power is reserved, so how much more power could be drawn. So it's quite a lot of information here. You can see a breakdown of how here's our geothermal, here's some hydro in the North Island. Hydro, what's green? Green's geothermal. Brown is wind and green is geothermal. So you can see that we have a big chunk. Geothermal in the North Island is almost accounting for half of what hydro can make, but they always want to run the geothermal high. And I think there's coal and gas, or cogen, that's like heat and power. So there's some industries that require heat and power to run a factory. You might have a steam-based process, so I think that's what's going on with that. Yeah, so you can just see how that is. So it's a fun thing. Yeah, so the thing is why not use ripple controllers? If you just had to have, so this is what I like to always think of, like, what if I'm king of New Zealand and I'm just going to make laws? It'll be like, okay, so here, as king of New Zealand, I'll just say, if you install a charger at home that uses more than 10 amps, I'm just going to choose that, and i.e. that means that you can plug in an 8 amp charger into a regular wall outlet. So anybody who just needs to temporarily charge an electric car, maybe you live in a flat or rent a house or something, and you just want to put in a charger in the garage, you might not want to be living there for more than 6 months, so you don't want to spend thousands of dollars installing a wall charger in that garage. You can just use the plug-in charger, and if it's an 8 amp one, well, that's very low current draw by comparison, like half as much as a hot water cylinder, or a third as much as a stove. That's not a big ordeal for the power network to deal with. Like, I would imagine that the majority of New Zealand homes, somebody cooks dinner in the evening, and you're going to be like drawing a couple of kilowatts, or maybe 3.5 kilowatts to cook dinner for anywhere between 10 minutes and 2 hours, depending on what you're trying to cook. The demand for an electric car doesn't seem that much. So I find that a little bit weird that they don't talk about that at all. And then, so that was the executive summary. So introduction to EV charging. So actually, this document has a lot of information for people who don't really know anything about electric car chargers, and so it's got quite a lot of good information in it. If you're doing a school project on car charging, this document's got quite a lot of useful information in it. So they say like trickle charging is anything up to 3 kilowatts. Now the mistake in this document is all the way through. They kind of like say that all these Nissan Leafs that are in New Zealand, which is about two-thirds of all the electric cars in New Zealand, or whatever it was in that graph back there, they're saying that they're around 3 kilowatts of draw, and I just think this is wrong. It's less than 2 kilowatts, because almost all the chargers are plug-in wall chargers, and so they can only be a maximum of 10 amps, and for safety reasons they should really only be a maximum of 8 amps. So I think there's some kind of mistakes in there. But I found some other things that I thought were dubious, so I'll just scroll to the pages where they were. That's, how does AC and DC charging, and what wireless charging is not a thing on electric cars. It just doesn't exist. They made a few of them, and I think that wireless charging will be fantastic for people that have disabilities. Like, say you're in a wheelchair and you just want to get out of your car, you have a parking place where it automatically charges, and that would make sense that you could have accessibility enabled wireless charging, but most people just don't need that. It's just much more efficient to use plugs and cheaper to use plugs. And when you plug it in, you know that it's plugged in and you know that it's working. So I don't think wireless charging is very good. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so here's this nice educational bit. New Zealand EVs tend to use Type 1 or Type 2 connectors. That is almost true everywhere in the world, actually. So because we have Japanese imports, all the Japanese import cars tend to come with Type 1 connectors, and we have any car that you can basically buy in Europe, you can get in New Zealand as well, and American cars somewhat. You can definitely get Teslas, and that's probably the only important one when it comes to electric cars. You get the GM Volt early on, and so the American and Japanese cars tend to have type 1 connectors, and European cars tend to have type 2 connectors. And then for DC charging, Japanese cars have CHAdeMO. So cars that went into the Japanese market, like the BMW i3 imported from Japan, will have a CHAdeMO connector, whereas in other places in the world, it will probably, in America, it will have a Type 1 CCS connector, and in Europe, it will have a Type 2 CCS connector. So New Zealand, just to make it easy, we've standardized that all of the AC chargers that are provided publicly should have, any new ones that get built, should have Type 2 connectors, and then if you've got a Type 1 car, use a Type 2 to Type 1 cable, and if you've got a Type 2 car, use a Type 2 to Type 2 cable, which means that all the public chargers can have this connector for AC charging. So that's where you're going to be in a car park for half an hour or more, typically. They'll have those. And if you're DC charging, all of the DC chargers will have both CHAdeMO and this one down here, CCS Type 2. We did have a few of these, but they've mostly been totally withdrawn. And it says, I'm sure it says this, was adopted for some, yeah. Currently fast charging stations in New Zealand are transitioning from CCS Type 1 to CCS Type 2. That happened like 2 years ago. So this is a newish report, but old information. And this, Tesla superchargers. So Tesla cars imported from UK or Australia have Type 2 inlet, but can use CHAdeMO connector using Tesla only. Okay, so Tesla Model S's and X's, there's none of these in New Zealand. There are never, there might be like 2 cars which have this, which were private imports or something, but no cars, no Tesla cars have these. Tesla cars have Type 2 CCS on the Model 3s, and they have a connector that looks like this, but actually carries DC on the supercharger. So Model S and X's have this connector. So if you go to New Zealand Supercharger, they have those ones with the 2 outlets. They'll have this one and this one. So that's just a thing that seemed a little bit that seemed wrong in that report. And what have I got? Yeah, I'm just reading my notes that I made earlier. It's the same page 18, WorkSafe. That's page 18. Okay, so I had some note about this paragraph here. WorkSafe guidelines specify that these cables are only permitted to use Mode 2 and limited charging under 8 amp to 32 amps. Oh yeah, so this is just a little, well, yes, I'm just saying that when some Japanese cars were first imported into New Zealand, you couldn't buy a Type 1 charger that was designed for New Zealand, so a lot of people very early on converted. So this is more than 2 years ago. And because of the exponential rate at which cars have been coming in, 3/4 or so of all the cars that have come in the last 2 years. So really only about 1/4 might have 16 amp chargers that were the Japanese ones converted, or other 16 amp charger, whatever was available. And again, it says that, however, most charging cables in New Zealand are rated to 16 amps. It's not true. The vast majority of charging cables on older cars in New Zealand are only 8 amps. I know because I worked at a car company selling them, and I've seen what got supplied. And I would say like about 10% of customers bought anything other than the 8 amp charge cable because it was the cheapest and easiest and most compatible. And the cars mostly were selling Nissan Leafs, and so they people were fine. They, if you're only driving 40 k's per day, an overnight charge on an 8 amp charger gets done in, I don't know, 4 hours or something, so it's fine. If your battery was totally empty, it might take 8 or 10 hours, but that would still be fine. And so that moots the point of what this whole document seems to emphasize. On page 19. Yeah, so page 19 has an, oh yeah, this was questionable as well. I don't think people use 5 kilowatts of room heating. I mean, yeah, maybe a few really rich people, but 5 kilowatts, that's $1 of power per hour. I don't think most people's power bills are like $20 a day. Like, somebody with the old $6,000 per month power bill or something like that. This doesn't ring true. These numbers. I know there's peaks. These could be peaks, but most it's even got a picture of a heat pump. So, or is that a fan heater? I don't know. So like, I just find this a little unusual because I don't think these draw rates are this high. Like I mean, without an electric car, I use like between sort of 16 and 20. What was it? 16 and 20 kilowatt hours per day. So that's like 1 kilowatt averaging. And so if it's only at dinner time when I turn my stove on that my power goes much above a 1.5 or 2 kilowatts. So I know that when I plug my car in, I do have a 16 amp charger, and so it does draw a lot. Like, I know that if I'm driving my long commute every day, 100 k's a day down to the city and back, my electric car charging accounts for almost half of my household power use. It's easily a third of my household power use. But without when I'm not commuting, my household power use drops considerably. So cars are a big load, that's true. But if you're using an 8 amp charger, it spreads that out over a long time. I contacted my power company, and actually, because of the way, so I've got dual metered power, so I have an on-peak and an off-peak kind of power outlets, and so my one's wired up so that the power company can switch off my charger, exactly the thing that I'm promoting. The ripple control turns my charger off at peak times. So I already have this. So you don't need smart chargers controlling. You don't need smart chargers controlling your household electricity use if you just connect your charger. So if you've got a permanent wired-in charger, just have it wired into the Ripple controller, and then the power company can control it. So everywhere in New Zealand, Ripple controllers are in use. So if you've just got one still in your house from being on the hot water, and it was compulsory for all hot water cylinders over a certain size to have it, so almost everybody in New Zealand already has a Ripple controller installed at their house, then just install your car charger on the Ripple controller. You don't need smart charging. I'm saying, like, yeah, smart charging's good, and get it and have it and allow the power company to do it, but I just think that's a little bit weird. They don't ever offer Ripple charging. They never notice it. Maybe the people who work at KPMG don't know what Ripple charging is or Ripple controllers are. It's actually possible they don't know. So that's and so need for managed charging accelerates with high EV adoption in order to maintain stability of the electrical network. Except you don't need to if you use Ripple controllers. So a lot of this important stuff that's in this document, it's true if you don't use the thing that you've already got installed in your house. So that's like, it's true that I could waste more power on heating because I do have some plug-in heaters, but I normally use my fan heater, my heat pump, because heat pumps are my one's about 3.5 to 1 efficiency. So I get 3.5 kilowatts of heat for each kilowatt of electricity I use from my heat pump. And so anybody who's got a heat pump is basically crazy to use a plug-in heater if you've already got a heat pump. And so I just argue the same thing. Anybody who's got an electric car, you're crazy to plug it into a normal power outlet if you can plug it into one that the power company is already managing, using the system that's already installed in your house managing the power anyway. So if I charge so I do have a normal plug-in wall outlet car charger too, which I use when I'm away at other places. Or I could use it if something goes wrong with my current charger, I presume. I would be silly to use that because the power that I plug in, so my computer here, the power it uses costs a third more than the power from the controlled one. So the controlled circuit, the power costs less, and it costs less because you've got the option of the power company turning it off at will. So you don't want to have things like your TV and your computer plugged into the managed power network, because it will just go off at peak times when everybody cooks dinner, which is very inconvenient because it's probably the time you want to be using your computer or TV. And so it's kind of a little bit weird. And then I did have one other thing. So they do go like, let's have smart grids and smart power networks and do all that, and you can have all that's fine, but you can actually just do something way cheaper. So there's two things. One is that people can use the timer that's already built into their car to do that work. Trying to find my web browser, or you can go to Amazon and buy. So this is something that power companies can do. So all the people who have plug-in chargers, if you want to manage them too, you could get a thing like this. And so the power companies could post everybody who's got a car charger one of these. They could just bulk buy them. So they cost $48. So 48 New Zealand dollars is like, what, 35 American, or just half that for euros or something. The power companies could send their customers, they could send them a letter and go, do you have an electric car? Or have a thing, do you have an electric car? Do you want to, put it, they can put it in the power bill. If you've got an electric car, we'll send you a smart switch. So you get the smart switch, not this particular one because it's made for the UK, but you could get a New Zealand one, I'm sure. And you plug it in and then plug your car charger into it. And what they can do is they can send a text message to your smart switch to turn it on and off. So they don't even have to turn it off every day. They only have to turn it off when the power network's peaking. And so you could do it very easily with a very simple control method. Remember, there's only like 16,000 electric cars in New Zealand, so they don't have to buy very many of them. I think you could implement the whole system for $1 million or less. Like it would be straight ahead. Or you could just use the ripple switches that everybody already has in their house. So I just think like there's some things that go weird in these kinds of documents. And did I have any other notable things? Yes. Oh, yeah. So, yes, manual charging management in New Zealand. The most common New Zealand basic charging cables are supplied with the vehicle, and overnight trickle charging is sufficient to charge most cars for 1 or 2 days of use. Moving from option 1 to option 2 is relatively simple by installing a smarter charger, but moving from 2 to 3 is more challenging as it relies on broader market developments. Okay, so they have some scheme, some fully managed. Oh, so this allows you to, power companies to choose when your car charges, and if you've got a super smart one, you can even reverse the power flow out of the battery, which is cool. We can do that later. But at the moment, most people don't want the extra wear on their batteries. I heard that 80%, we have bidirectional, so it's bidirectional managed charging. About 80 or 90% of the benefit is gained by just controlling when the cars charge, as opposed to taking power out of them as well. And I had something else on page 29. And it's currently EVs. Currently EVs owners tend to use smart charging as a monitoring tool for power consumption and range estimation rather than for charging management. Some users of EVs allow faster charging above 3.7 kilowatts can benefit from smart chargers managing electrical load at the home level. However, the majority of EV users currently cannot take advantage of dynamic charging management and have little incentive to upgrade. Yeah, so I know people who have solar panels, and there's a special kind of charger you can get for solar panels. It looks at your household demand for power and how much your power is being generated on your panels. And if there's a surplus from your panels, it diverts the surplus power into your car, which is really good for people who leave their cars parked at home during the day. And I know some people who do have some cars, then they use them that way. There's a product called Zappy which does that, and you just install one of those, and if you've got your car parked in the garage and you have it plugged in, it will just divert the power off the solar panels if you've got surplus, rather than selling the power back at a very low price to the power company. But this is another thing that's going to happen as more New Zealanders get solar panels. Particularly the people who buy electric cars tend to be the same sorts of people who buy solar panels. So the people who park their cars at home during the day can absorb power from those solar panels. They have the same problem in Australia. So electric cars in Australia could benefit the network quite a lot as long as you have some kind of managed charging. The other one was that, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of cars have timers. So what you actually do is you choose your departure time rather than the charge start time. So a lot of the car chargers, they go, what time do you want the power to turn on and what time do you want it to turn off? And so you choose the turn off time to be near your departure time when you go to work in the morning. And the car actually randomly turns on the charger between when it's allowed to turn it on and when it's required to actually charge the car. And that way, the most Nissan Leafs have this built in. I think all of them do actually, maybe all of them, and they have power spreading already in the car. So they don't mention that these things can be done in the cars, and ones like Tesla conceivably could be done. You could have smart charging done by software in the car, and this, because the software in a Tesla is very easy for Tesla to upgrade. They could actually add a feature to control power management later. So Tesla could monitor the power, look at the EM6 live and look at the situation, and they could have cars turn their chargers off when there's peak demands too high. So Tesla could manage the charging of the cars based on how much hydrocarbons were being burned in the coal plant or whatever. So there's different ways of doing it. Anyway, another one of my classic rambly videos where I just try and have a look through. But I look at these things because I'm interested in the technology, and I don't want people to make mistakes. So it looks like there are a couple of things in there that they didn't seem right to me, and so the reason why I'm saying it is so that people can feedback information through, and we don't want. What do we want? Do we want the government to spend thousands of dollars on a report and for it to be inaccurate and then nobody say nothing about it? That's so I'm just going to be the person who says something about it. It just looks a little bit weird. Just a few little minor technical details. Maybe they should hire me next time. They need to do a report. I'd be happy to do it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's awesome if you subscribe to my channel. I'm writing some more opinion pieces. If you've seen any of my other opinions, look at I think it's facebook.com/DarylTalks, or just search for Daryl Talks About New Zealand on Facebook or on YouTube, and you can find my stuff. Thanks for watching. Have a lovely day.